Imagine you're a sailor on the high seas, miles from any land. Suddenly, you spot another ship. It looks fine, but something is off. It's sailing awkwardly, not responding to any signals. As you get closer, a chilling realization dawns on you. There's nobody on board. This isn't just a sea story. It really happened. This is the tale of the Mary Celeste, the most famous ghost ship in history. On December 5, 1872, the crew of the British vessel Des Gratia was sailing the Atlantic when they spotted a two-masted ship, a brigantine, moving sluggishly. From a distance, it just looked like another vessel on a long journey. But as they got closer, the unease began to set in. The ship's sails were set strangely, some catching the wind, while others flapped uselessly. There was no smoke from the galley, no one on deck. It was completely silent. The Des Gratia's crew called out, but only the wind and waves answered. A boarding party was sent over. As they climbed onto the deck, the silence was absolute. The name on the stern read Mary Celeste. She was a well-known ship, not some forgotten wreck. The vessel itself was in surprisingly good condition. It was seaworthy, riding the waves, just as it should. There were no signs of a struggle, no violence. The hatch covers were secure. The cargo hold was dry. Below deck, hundreds of barrels of industrial alcohol, the ship's valuable cargo, were all in place, untouched. It was as if the crew planned to return at any moment. In the galley, everything was neatly stowed. No half-eaten meals, no signs of a sudden interruption. The personal belongings of the crew, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, were still in their cabins. Clothes were folded. A child's toys lay untouched. It seemed that whatever happened, it wasn't a moment of sheer panic that leaves tables overturned and possessions scattered. It was orderly, almost deliberate. But a few crucial things were missing. The ship's only lifeboat, its navigation instruments, and the ship's papers. The last trace of human life was the ship's logbook. The final entry was dated November 25th, 10 days earlier. It placed the Mary Celeste about 6 days' sail from the Azores Islands. The captain's handwriting was steady, the entry routine, describing normal sailing conditions. There was absolutely no hint of trouble, no suggestion of danger. And after that entry, nothing. The story just stops. A 10-day gap of complete silence. Between that comlog entry and the silent deck found by the Des Gratia's crew, a mystery was born that we still can't solve today. Sailors are experts at reading ships. Every rope, every scratch, every angle of a sail tells a story. But the Mary Celeste's story made no sense. A hatch was open, but not forced. A sounding rod was found on the deck, which suggested the crew might have been checking for water in the hold. But the ship was barely taking on any water, nothing to justify abandoning ship. The pumps were working fine. The hull was intact. There was no evidence of a fire, a major storm, or a collision. Nothing that would force an experienced captain and crew to leave a perfectly good vessel in the middle of the Atlantic. The missing lifeboat is the key. People don't just vanish into thin air. They either leave in a boat, or they die on the ship. The fact that the Mary Celeste was fine but the lifeboat was gone suggests a conscious decision was made. The captain, his family, and the crew all got into that small boat and pushed off from their ship. Why? What could possibly make them abandon their safe, sturdy vessel for a tiny, vulnerable lifeboat in the vast, unpredictable ocean? Whatever the reason, it was a final choice. They were never seen or heard from again. The captain of the Des Gratia, David Morehouse, faced a tough decision. Maritime law meant he could claim the Mary Celeste and its valuable cargo as salvage. He put a few of his own men on the ghost ship, and together, the two vessels sailed for Gibraltar. As they sailed, the legend began. Rumors spread like wildfire. By the time they reached port, the world was hungry for an explanation. An abandoned ship invites wild theories because the simple ones just don't fit. If there was a storm, where was the damage? If there was a mutiny, where was the evidence of a fight? If pirates attacked, why was the valuable cargo left behind? The official inquiry in Gibraltar only deepened the mystery. Investigators scoured the ship. They found no bloodstains, no signs of foul play. One popular theory involved the cargo. The barrels contained denatured alcohol, and some thought that fumes might have built up, leading the crew to fear an imminent explosion. Perhaps they opened the hatches to air the hold out and, fearing the worst, temporarily took to the lifeboat, intending to return once the danger passed. A sudden squall or a snapped towline could have separated them from the Mary Celeste forever. It's a plausible idea, but it's just that, a theory. there's no hard evidence. Other theories ranged from the mundane to the fantastic. Some suggested a waterspout or a seaquake could have terrified the crew into leaving. Others whispered of mutiny, with the crew of the Dei Gratia themselves being accused of killing everyone on the Mary Celeste to claim the salvage money, though no evidence ever supported this. And of course, there were the more imaginative tale stories of sea monsters and even alien abduction. The lack of answers created a void that people filled with their own stories, each more dramatic than the last. What's truly haunting is not what was found on the Mary Celeste, but what wasn't. No bodies, no wreckage. The ocean simply swallowed 10 souls without a trace. The ship itself seemed to mock everyone who tried to understand. For 10 days, it sailed on its own, a ghost ship on a steady course, as if guided by an invisible hand. This event shook the very foundation of seafaring culture. Sailors rely on skill, experience, and rules to survive. The Mary Celeste was a terrifying reminder that sometimes there are no rules. Sometimes the sea just takes what it wants, without explanation. The story became a legend, a piece of maritime folklore. It's a tale that reminds us that no matter how much we explore and map our world, there are still corners of it that hold deep, unsettling secrets. The Mary Celeste wasn't just an abandoned ship. It became a floating question mark, a symbol of the unknown. At the heart of it all is that simple, chilling image. A perfectly good ship, sailing alone in the middle of the ocean, its decks empty, its story unfinished. And to this day, the ultimate fate of its captain, his family, and his crew remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the sea. To understand how 10 people could vanish from a perfectly sound ship, we have to travel back in time. Back to the beginning of the voyage, and to the people who trusted their lives to it. The story of the Mary Celeste begins in New York Harbor on November 7, 1872. She was bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial-grade alcohol. Now, this wasn't some higher-risk daredevil journey. The ship was solid, recently refitted, and her captain was a man known for caution, not for taking reckless chances. That captain was Benjamin Briggs. He was a veteran of Atlantic crossings, deeply religious and meticulously organized. He ran a tight, orderly ship. Briggs handpicked his crew, choosing men he trusted. He even brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along for the journey. This wasn't unusual back then. It was a sign of complete confidence in the ship and the trip. A captain who expects danger doesn't bring his family. The crew was small but competent, including his trusted first mate Albert Richardson and a handful of experienced seamen. There's no record of any arguments or tension. The pay was fair, the conditions were good. When the Mary Celeste sailed out into the Atlantic, she did so just like countless other ships, professionally, quietly, and with no sign of the mystery to come. The first few weeks of the voyage were completely uneventful. The ship's logbook, written in Captain Briggs' precise hand, shows routine progress. He noted weather observations, navigational calculations, wind shifts, and daily distances covered. There are no strange remarks, no complaints about the crew, and no mention of any mechanical problems. If there was any sense of unease on board, it was never written down. The only irregularities are things we notice now, looking back with the power of hindsight. One entry mentions some heavy weather, but nothing severe enough to cause alarm. Another notes the ship taking on a bit of water, which was very common for wooden ships, especially when they were freshly loaded with cargo. At the time, these were just minor details, worth a quick sentence in the log, but not a cause for concern. However, the cargo itself introduced a unique variable. Those barrels of alcohol were known to leak flammable vapor, especially if they weren't perfectly sealed. Captain Briggs knew this risk. He had specifically requested sturdy red oak barrels for most of the shipment, which were much better than the cheaper white oak alternative. But a small number of these inferior barrels were still part of the cargo, probably supplied by the shipper. At sea, these vapors would be invisible and often odorless. While a full-blown explosion was rare, it wasn't unheard of. This fact would later become a key piece of the puzzle, but during the voyage, it was just a background risk, not an immediate threat. As the Mary Celeste sailed eastward, the weather began to change. The North Atlantic in late autumn is notoriously unpredictable. You can have days of calm seas followed by sudden, violent squalls, and yet, Nothing in the surviving records suggests a storm so powerful that it would force the crew to abandon ship. In fact, when the ship was discovered, her sails were only partially set, suggesting cautious sailing, not a panicked response to an emergency. The ship wasn't stripped of its sails, nor was it positioned to brace against a massive storm. One of the most confusing details is the ship's last known position. The final log entry on November 25th shows Captain Briggs believed he was west of the Azores Islands, but later calculations suggest the ship was actually much further east than he thought. This kind of navigational error wasn't uncommon in an era before modern GPS, when sailors relied on sextants and chronometers. Usually, such a mistake would be corrected over time. It might cause a delay, but it wouldn't cause the entire crew to disappear. What's even more haunting are the personal spaces on board the Mary Celeste. They paint a picture of normal life, not a sudden crisis. In the captain's cabin, clothes were found neatly folded. The baby's toys and belongings were still there. There was no sign of a hurried evacuation, no drawers emptied in a panic. But a few key items were missing: the ship's official papers, the captain's sextant, and the chronometer. These are the essential tools a captain would take if he planned to navigate another vessel, like a lifeboat. They are not things you would grab blindly in a moment of pure terror. This strange combination: orderly cabins, essential navigational tools gone, but personal items left behind, points to a deliberate decision, not a random accident. Whatever made the crew leave, it seems to have unfolded over minutes, or maybe even hours, not seconds. They had time to think. They had time to choose what to take. And they clearly assumed they might be coming back. That assumption, which is so clear in what they left behind, would prove to be tragically wrong. No other ships in the area reported seeing anything unusual. No distress signals were spotted. No lifeboat was ever found adrift. The sea itself offered no clues. No floating debris to tell the story of what happened. The Mary Celeste just sailed on alone, her course altered but her voyage continuing, as if the human element had simply evaporated. In the world of sailing, this was deeply disturbing. It went against everything sailors understood. Ships were lost to storms, fires, collisions, or mutinies. They weren't just found empty in the middle of the ocean for no reason. The fact that Captain Briggs and his crew were so skilled and careful only makes the mystery more profound. If experienced, cautious sailors could make a choice that led them to vanish without a trace, then what hope did anyone have? By the time the ghost ship was found, the true details were already starting to get twisted. Rumors and wild theories began to fill in the gaps, exaggerating the strange details and ignoring the mundane facts. But beneath all the layers of speculation lies a simple, chilling truth. The voyage of the Mary Celeste began with confidence, professionalism, and routine. Her fate wasn't signaled by chaos or madness. It grew out of a series of small, seemingly reasonable decisions that, when added together, led to an outcome that no one on board could have ever predicted. The real mystery of the Mary Celeste isn't about some dramatic event. It's about the absences, the things that didn't happen, the alarms that were never raised, the dangers that were never recorded. The ship didn't cry out its fate. It carried it silently across the ocean, accumulating questions with every lonely mile, until those questions were all that remained. When a ship is found empty in the middle of the ocean, the story isn't just about what happened. It's about what we think happened. In the case of the Mary Celeste, the moment she was found adrift and abandoned, explanations started taking shape, not from hard evidence, but from the gut feelings of the people who lived by the sea. Sailors, merchants, insurers, journalists, they all looked at the empty decks and saw their own fears reflected back. These theories spread like wildfire through ports and newspapers, getting a little more dramatic with every retelling. One of the first and most popular ideas was that nature itself was the culprit. The sea, after all, is a powerful and unpredictable force. People whispered about sudden waterspouts, monstrous rogue waves, or even underwater earthquakes that could have spooked the crew. This was a comforting thought in a way. It meant the crew were victims of bad luck, not bad people. It preserved the idea that sailors were undone by nature, not by each other. But when investigators looked closer, this theory didn't hold water. A wave big enough to wash 10 people overboard would have shredded the sails and smashed the rigging. The Mary Celeste was messy, but she wasn't wrecked. Nature seemed too gentle to be the killer. So, attention turned from the world outside the ship to the world inside it. The cargo industrial alcohol became the star of a new, compelling theory. What if some of the barrels had leaked, filling the cargo hold with flammable vapors. Imagine a sudden, loud bang, not a fiery explosion, but a sharp pressure release. Captain Briggs might have thought the whole ship was about to blow. In a panic, he could have ordered everyone into the lifeboat, tying it to the ship with a long rope. The plan would be to wait at a safe distance until the danger passed. But then, a sudden gust of wind, a snapped rope, or just a simple miscalculation, and the lifeboat is separated from the mother ship, lost forever in the vastness of the Atlantic. This theory was brilliant because it explained so much. It explained why they took the navigational tools they planned to come back. It explained why they left their belongings they were in a hurry. And it explained why there was no damage to the ship. It was a reasonable captain making a reasonable decision in a moment of perceived crisis. The only problem, there was no proof. No one found any residue from an explosion, and the barrels were mostly secure. The theory felt right, but feeling right isn't the same as being right. Of course, where there's mystery, there are always darker suspicions. Mutiny was a common fear on the high seas, and the idea surfaced almost immediately. Maybe the crew, fed up with the captain, had seized the lifeboat and abandoned Briggs and his family. But this theory quickly fell apart. Captain Briggs was known as a fair and respected leader. The crew had no real motive to mutiny. The alcohol cargo wasn't something they could easily sell, and stealing a well-known ship like the Mary Celeste would be incredibly foolish. Most importantly, there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken furniture, no weapons. Mutiny explained why the people were gone, but it couldn't explain the eerie peace they left behind. Piracy was another popular idea, but it was dismissed just as quickly. By the 1870s, pirates in the North Atlantic were a dying breed, and pirates are criminals, but they aren't stupid. They wouldn't attack a ship, take the crew, and then leave behind a valuable cargo of alcohol. It just didn't make financial sense. Like the mutiny theory, it was a story of human violence that just didn't fit the silent, undamaged scene. When all the logical explanations hit a dead end, people's imaginations began to run wild. Stories of sea monsters started to circulate, giant squid pulling sailors from the deck, or some unknown creature from the deep. These tales weren't really about what people believed. They were a way to give a name to their anxiety. A giant squid is a terrifying thought, but it's a specific fear. An unknown, silent disappearance is much, much worse. Even people who didn't believe in sea monsters repeated the stories, because giving the mystery a monstrous face made it feel a little less unsettling. Meanwhile, back on land, the official investigation in Gibraltar was only making things murkier. The men from the Dei Gratia, the ship that found the Mary Celeste, were the heroes of the story, but the salvage court treated them with suspicion. If the court could prove that Dei Gratia's crew had engaged in foul play to claim the salvage reward, their payout would be drastically reduced. This created an environment where every shadow was a potential conspiracy. This official skepticism gave a permission slip to everyone else to speculate wildly, and the newspapers ate it up. The Mary Celeste was the perfect headline. Editors favored sensationalism over facts, printing stories of madness, curses, and dark conspiracies. Small details were invented and repeated until they became accepted as truth. A clock that had stopped, a half-eaten meal on the table. These dramatic images were printed in papers around the world, even though they weren't in the official reports. They just made for a better story. Among sailors, the tale of the Mary Celeste became a kind of modern legend. It was a floating parable, a cautionary tale where the lesson could change depending on who was telling it. For some, it was a story about the dangers of certain cargo. For others, it was a reminder of how quickly a routine voyage could turn into a disaster. What's fascinating is that all these theories, from rogue waves to sea monsters, had one thing in common. They were all attempts to create order out of chaos. People needed an explanation, any explanation, to make the world feel predictable again. The real horror of the Mary Celeste wasn't the possibility of a monster or a mutiny. The real horror was the possibility that nothing dramatic happened at all. That a series of small mistakes, minor misjudgments, and a bit of bad luck could lead to total, silent annihilation. That's a story that's hard to tell because it has no villain and no climax. Over the decades, these theories were repeated so many times that they started to sound like facts. Depending on who you asked, the Mary Celeste mystery was solved. Some were certain it was the alcohol fumes, others were convinced it was a mutiny. But beneath this false sense of certainty, the facts of the case or the lack of them remained. The theories didn't solve the mystery. They just buried it under layers and layers of interpretation. The Mary Celeste stopped being just a historical event. She became a story, a space where evidence ends, and the human imagination must take over. Not because our imagination is better than the truth, but because in the face of a perfect, silent mystery, it's all we have. As the years passed and theories multiplied, attention always circled back to the stubborn, physical details of the ship itself. The Mary Celeste was re-examined not just as a vessel, but as a collection of clues whose meanings shifted depending on who was looking. Each object on board seemed to offer an answer, only to snatch it away, creating a pattern of neologic that never quite added up. The most scrutinized piece of evidence was the condition of the ship. Her hull was sound, her timbers were tight, and her keel was unbroken. Marine surveys found no structural failure that would justify abandonment. This detail is crucial because 19th century sailors knew risk intimately. They didn't leave a ship lightly. A leaking hull, unless it was catastrophic, was something crews managed, not fled from. The pumps aboard the Mary Celeste were fully operational, and the amount of water found in the hold was within normal limits. This single fact undermines any theory of an imminent sinking and forces us to look for more abstract dangers. Then there's the cargo of industrial alcohol, a central element in so many speculative theories. Of the 1,701 barrels on board, only 9 were found empty. These specific barrels were made of white oak, which is more porous and prone to leakage than the red oak used for the others. Vapors may have indeed built up in the hold, but there was no scorch damage, no residue, and no warped planks. If there had been some kind of explosive release of pressure, it left absolutely no forensic trace. The idea of an invisible, odorless danger remained plausible, but plausibility alone isn't proof. The navigation instruments add another layer of contradiction. The missing sextant and the ship's papers imply that the crew had a plan. It suggests they intended to navigate on their own. Yet the chronometer, an equally vital instrument for determining longitude, was left behind. This selective removal suggests either a simple oversight or a great deal of haste, but it doesn't scream panic. It paints a picture of people acting under stress, but still believing their situation was temporary. They behaved as if their ship would remain nearby, accessible, and waiting for their return. And what about the lifeboat? It was gone. Its absence is central to the mystery, yet it offers no clarity. Had it capsized in a storm, debris might have eventually surfaced. Had it drifted intact, another vessel might have sighted it. But the Atlantic Ocean is vast enough to swallow such a small object without a trace. The lifeboat's disappearance is therefore both meaningful and meaningless. It's evidence of an action, but with no evidence of the outcome. Even the ship's course after abandonment complicates things. The Mary Celeste didn't just wander aimlessly across the ocean. Her sails, though imperfectly set, still caught the wind and carried her forward. She made her way toward the Strait of Gibraltar, not by design, but by simple continuity, following the wind and current, just as she had before. This continuity blurs the line between before and after the incident, making it impossible to pinpoint the exact moment of crisis. There was no dramatic rupture visible in the ship's behavior, only the sudden, silent absence of the people who guided her. Naturally, suspicion fell on the crew of the Dei Gratia, the ship that found the Mary Celeste. Their testimony was combed for any inconsistency. Minor discrepancies were magnified under the lens of suspicion. Who boarded first? Who went below deck? Who noticed which detail? Every tiny point became a source of contention. The suspicion lingered not because of evidence, but because of a basic human discomfort. An unsolved mystery demands a culprit, and when none could be found, attention simply turned to the nearest available humans. Official inquiries produced reports that were careful with language and cautious in their judgments. They noted what was missing, what was present, and what could not be explained. They resisted sensational conclusions, but this very restraint proved unsatisfying to the public. The absence of a neat answer felt like negligence, as if the investigators had failed, rather than confronted an event that was inherently ambiguous. Over time, these official reports were overshadowed by retellings that simplified the findings, smoothing over the messy uncertainty to create a more compelling narrative. One of the most persistent contradictions lies in the total absence of distress signals. No flags were flown, no flares were launched, and no gunshots were reported. Even in a sudden emergency, sailors were trained to announce their predicament. The silence from the Mary Celeste suggests one of two things. Either the threat was so sudden and strange that it discouraged the use of fire and flame, or the crew believed they were staying close enough to the ship to make signals unnecessary. Both interpretations point back to the same haunting idea. The crew did not believe they were abandoning the Mary Celeste for good. Their personal effects reinforced this. Valuables were left behind. Clothes remained neatly stored. The captain's wife's sewing machine, with a piece of work still in it, was untouched. These are not the choices of people convinced they are facing death. They are the choices of people expecting to return, people who acted on a miscalculation whose nature remains completely unknown. That miscalculation, rather than any single dramatic event, has become the silent, throbbing center of this entire case. As the decades passed, no new evidence emerged, but new reinterpretations certainly did. Each generation brought its own logic, its own anxieties, and reweighed the same set of facts under different assumptions. Advances in chemistry strengthened the theories about alcohol, vapor. Improved knowledge of weather patterns and rogue waves challenged the simple storm explanations. Psychological insights offered new ways to frame decision-making under extreme stress. Yet none of these new lenses ever managed to transform uncertainty into certainty. They only refined the questions without ever truly answering them. The refusal of the evidence to close the case is what has preserved its power. Most maritime disasters eventually settle into history because their causes, however tragic, are identifiable. The Mary Celeste resists that. Her evidence doesn't contradict itself overtly, it simply fails to converge. Every detail points somewhere, but they don't all point to the same place. In this refusal to be solved, the ship became something more than a case study. She became a powerful example of the limits of reconstruction. Investigators could describe the state of the ship down to the smallest item on board, but they could not recover the one thing that mattered, the moment of choice that altered everything. That moment left no mark on the wood or the ropes. It existed only in the human judgment of those on board, a judgment that is now lost to the sea. What remains, then, is not ignorance, but a profound tension, a delicate balance between what is known and what cannot be known. The Mary Celeste doesn't withhold answers maliciously. She offers them partially, just enough to sustain our belief in an explanation, but never enough to confirm one. And it's this incomplete generosity that keeps the mystery alive, forcing each new generation to confront the same boundary between evidence and inference, fact and story. The Mary Celeste sails on, not in the water, but in our collective imagination, a perfect, unsolvable puzzle. Have you ever heard the phrase, "It's like the Mary Celeste in here"? It's a common way to describe an empty, mysteriously abandoned place. But how many of us know the true story behind that name? How did a simple merchant ship, found adrift in the Atlantic in 1872, become one of history's most enduring and fascinating legends? The answer has less to do with what actually happened on the ocean, and more to do with the power of storytelling. When the Mary Celeste was found, she was in perfectly seaworthy condition. Her cargo was intact, her sails were set, but her crew of 10, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a pirate attack, just an empty ship and a mystery that baffled the authorities. With the official investigation hitting a dead end, the Mary Celeste's story could have faded into obscurity, just another strange tale lost to the sea. But it didn't. Instead, her voyage through our collective imagination was just beginning. The real turning point came 12 years later, in 1884, a young up-and-coming writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who would later create Sherlock Holmes, published a short story inspired by the case. He changed names and invented dramatic, fictional details, including a violent mutiny and a revenge plot. Even though his story was clearly a work of fiction, it was so compelling that for many people, it became the definitive version of events. Fiction rushed in to fill the gaps that history had left open, and in doing so, it forever changed our memory of the Mary Celeste. This is where the legend really took flight. Details that Conan Doyle invented started to be reported as fact. The idea of a warm meal left uneaten on the table became a powerful symbol of a sudden disappearance, even though no such meal was ever found. A broken clock, supposedly frozen at the moment of crisis, added to the drama, but it too was a fabrication. These details stuck around because they made the story better. They gave the mystery a shape that our minds could easily grasp. They satisfied our need for a good narrative. Over the decades, popular culture became a powerful echo chamber. Newspapers, magazines, and radio shows all retold the story, each adding their own spin. often prioritizing a spooky atmosphere over historical accuracy. Print media loved to embellish the details. Radio broadcasts used suspenseful sound effects to create a sense of dread. And when television came along, documentaries focused on creating an eerie, visual mood. The Mary Celeste was no longer a real-world case to be solved. She became a feeling, an evocation of the unknown. Her name became a metaphor. When someone says a place is like the Mary Celeste, they're not talking about the specific details of a 19th century maritime incident. They're tapping into a universal feeling of unexplained absence. The ship became a symbol, detached from her own history. And that's the strange magic of this story. The mystery is so powerful, it's reusable. It's a blank canvas where every generation can project its own anxieties. In an age of technological optimism, she's a cautionary tale about overconfidence. In times of uncertainty, she's a reminder that everything we know can vanish in an instant. Of course, people are still trying to solve the mystery. New theories pop up all the time, often repackaging old ideas with a modern, scientific-sounding gloss. Some suggest a seaquake, others propose that fumes from the ship's cargo of industrial alcohol caused a panic. But none of these theories can account for every single piece of evidence without making new assumptions. The facts of the case create a boundary that even the most creative imagination can't quite cross. And this resistance is precisely what keeps the story alive. It prevents the mystery from collapsing into a simple, neat explanation. It's ironic that one of the most forgotten parts of the Mary Celeste story is what happened to the ship herself. She wasn't a ghost ship that vanished forever. After being found, she was sailed to port, returned to service, and passed through several owners for over a decade before meeting an unremarkable end. This mundane reality stands in stark contrast to her mythic status. The legend grew not because the ship disappeared, but because she returned empty. She didn't give us a tragic conclusion. She gave us a question that has echoed through time. And that's what makes the Mary Celeste so unique. Her story isn't just a tragedy or a tale of survival. It's a pause in the narrative, a place where cause and effect seem to break down. It shows us that history is shaped not just by what we know, but by what we can't explain. The mystery belongs to everyone, to sailors and writers, to skeptics and dreamers. Each of us finds something different in her silent, empty decks. For some, it's a warning. For others, a romantic enigma. For most of us, it's simply unforgettable. So, the Mary Celeste continues her journey, not across the water, but through time, carrying with her the enduring power of an unanswered question. She reminds us that not every story needs an ending. Sometimes, the absence of an ending is the very thing that makes a story worth telling. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the mysteries that history leaves behind, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge what we think we know. See you next time.